I'm Kareem from Open Source Defense, and this is a conversation with Tim from Hoffman Tactical. If you like it, subscribe to our X, our Substack, and our Instagram. And a reminder that we run Open Source Defense Capital, where we invest in civilian defense startups and the tech that empowers them. So if you're a founder in that space, reach out. And now here's our conversation with Tim. How do you decide what to work on?
So it's sort of a mix between things that people want, like the latest LR308 lower project was a product which people wanted. It's the upgraded version of my older lower. I sell kits. That's for the business. And then my other projects tend to be more of directions that I think weapons should be going in, or just a personal interest.
So how do people tell you, like, how do you gauge demand? Is it just watching like Instagram,
mostly like
Twitter?
Yeah, like Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, comments, like a lot of emails. So just people talking and people just emailing me, asking me about stuff.
Okay. So like over the past 5 years, when you think, like, go back in time to 2020 and think about, if I asked you, okay, in 2025, what is the landscape of 3D printed guns going to look like, and 3D printing in kind of the 2A space generally? How would today compare to what your predictions would have been? Like,
Actually, pretty close. And the reason I say that is because not much has changed. There was kind of a little burst of activity there in 2025, and then things have kind of stagnated in the last couple of years. That's not really true. There are some cool projects being worked on, but it's there haven't been any like huge breakthroughs. It's just people working on kind of cool stuff. There's some new things being worked on, but it's not the same level of interest. I think what the big change we saw in 2020 was really just people beginning to realize that 3D printed firearms was a thing, a hobby, if you will, and a lot of people started getting into it, and it started growing. So we've had a lot of growth since 2020. A lot of people have gotten into it, but the root technology is the same. The things people are making are pretty similar, and nothing catastrophic really, or that's really the wrong word, but nothing sudden or explosive has happened since 2020. We've gotten much cheaper printers, easier to use, and really it's just growth.
So, clearly you're probably best known for the 3D printed guns and innovation there, right? You've probably been in it for so long, but to be honest, Kareem and I have kept up with it, but haven't done too much hands-on. In fact, I'm gonna out Kareem right now and say he doesn't even own a 3D printer, which is
to my eternal shame. It's true.
Terrible thing to say about someone.
Yeah, it is.
But I said it. But I will say, from someone who's been in the gun space for many decades now, the 3D printed space is just kind of a mess. You are a little bit of a clear spot, but overall, someone entering this space, I will tell you, is like a noob, like Singh. It's very kind of clandestine. It's disjoint. It's not clear, like, how to move forward. Like, where do I start? There are some kind of guides, but everything's wishy-washy, and like no one's saying like, do this, use this. Here's some STLs. Here's the steps. Like other things. It still feels a little kind of broken.
So yes and no, because if you get on Twitter and try to learn how to do this, yes, you'll have issues. There's a lot of there's some controversy. There's a lot of different people doing different things with potentially different objectives, and that could discourage people trying to get in for sure. However, at least from talking to my customers and people who've bought kits from me, who might, it's kind of a direct contact I have with people outside of social media. A lot of people who are getting involved aren't really they're not involved in the community, so to speak. They're just, they see probably a video on YouTube, and then I have some basic guides on my website. Obviously there's like the Control Pew getting started guide, which is pretty basic. And maybe, I'm not sure how much he's updated that in the last couple of years to be up to date with newer printers. It's probably a little outdated. I just actually went through and updated my printer page to be a little bit more up to date on things that have changed with like the Bamboo and Prusa printers, their new releases. But I think it's actually not too hard to get involved. if someone is just kind of focused and looks for the information, because a lot of the like the releases, like at least my releases, releases that Ivan does, Ivan the Troll, like the KF5, his one of his projects, and others, they have very detailed documentation. So we go over parts you need, filaments. There's some discussion of 3D printers, and generally I like to point people to the 3D printer community in general, because there's a huge amount of resources on 3D printing online. It's very easy to learn about 3D printing. If you just get
Yeah,
on
that
YouTube
part
and look it up.
is.
Yeah,
Agreed.
and it's kind of 3D printing guns, and that's you. If you haven't worked with guns before, you need to learn how to work with firearms, and that's where the documentation goes over assembly and things like that. But it's the information is all there for the more basic projects. It's really just a matter of not getting lost in the noise. So I think if somebody is on Twitter, I think it'd be easy to get lost in the noise. But I think a lot of people who just Google it, I kind of ironically, can get right to the source and figure it out pretty easily.
I think kind of. I'd say, like, if I were to do it right now, I might have trouble finding like the best or the, the latest and greatest in Glock style frames or AR lowers, which are going to be the two most obvious things. And then like, okay, what's then the details of kind of the printer, like what orientation should I print it? What's the like. What materials would be best,
Yep.
et cetera, et cetera. That seems like it's not as cut and dry.
So it's interesting that you brought up finding the latest and greatest. So there's a very recently released project, and it's called the GunCAD Index. I don't know if you've seen that yet. Have you seen that?
Have not.
No.
No.
It's just the guncadindex.com, or it might just be GunCAD Index. I have it linked up my website. It's been on Twitter. And that's a project a gentleman I've been going back and forth with for a little while. He's been working on it, and he finally released it. And what he's doing is he's indexing files off of Odyssey. And Odyssey is the repository that most people put stuff on. I put all my stuff out there, and torrents as well. I do some torrents, but Odyssey is where most people find stuff. But they have a horrible search engine, so
it's undiscoverable.
Yeah, he's been indexing. Basically, he's got a whole system. He comes up with, he puts tags on stuff, and it's actually really good. If you want to find Glock frames, you can look it up. There's different ways of sorting it. You can find like Chairman Wan's stuff. You can find all kinds of stuff I didn't even know was out there. You just get on there and look it up. He's indexed it all. So that's actually a pretty big deal as far as finding stuff. And I think as that gains popularity, you should check it out. It'll be easier to find what people are looking for very quickly. And it's an open source project. Go ahead.
No, please go ahead.
I was going to say it's an open source project, and he's got it. I think he's really the only one running a server right now, but he's got it set up so other people can set up basically like a seed box type setup and maintain all the files themselves. So he can set up like an Odyssey. I'm not particularly familiar with how all this works. You guys are probably far more kind of up to date on how these software systems work, but he has it set up for a decentralized model moving forward, which is cool as well.
Yeah, that's pretty interesting. A lot of the stuff was behind kind of paywalls too. So a lot of the best stuff,
So that's actually not true. I would say there are, with no exceptions that I can think of, there are no good designs behind paywalls whatsoever.
Okay.
Everything behind a paywall and it's really just Defense Distributed is the only one I can think of off the top of my head. And they just take openly released designs and put it on their repository, which is fine.
I see.
I have no problem with them doing that if people want to support them. But there's everything's free. That's a pretty strong part of the community, is releasing things for free.
And like on some level, how could it not be? It would be very hard to keep any kind of real innovation behind a paywall.
Yeah, and I can't think of a single
leak out.
example of where someone has done that inside of the GunCAD community. It's much more common actually in the general 3D printing world than it is inside of 3D printed guns.
One thing I think about a lot with 3D printed guns is this. I liken it to Bitcoin, and these are both things I am a big fan of, but they're similar in that they're paradoxical. Like on the one hand, they have been around for quite a while and have only grown in that time and are at the point where they're like actually pretty big and pretty innovative and very popular. And like even at the same time as being popular and lots of innovation around them, also haven't really found a mass market application. So it's this like weird thing where it's like a, like when computer platforms would come out, they'd always be like, oh, what's the killer app? And if it doesn't have a killer app, then like it's going to fail. And it always did if there wasn't some app that was super popular for it. But like, here you go with 3D printing that, as far as 3D printing in guns, like, does it have a killer app yet? Does it need one ever?
Yeah, so you're trying, when you say killer app, you're trying to like point towards a some application which has a mass appeal.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so I mean, kind of the way I look at basically everything you just said is that there's a lot of room for growth. Both with Bitcoin and with 3D printed guns. It's still so small that there's huge potential for growth. Is kind of the way my takeaway from that. As far as kind of having a killer application, which is kind of an interesting way of thinking about it. I don't know if you can draw a parallel there. You're trying to think of like, why would you 3D print a firearms? That's kind of the equivalent question is the why, like why would you do it? And it's kind of, there kind of isn't a good answer, to be honest. I think that the way we make that why give a much bigger reason behind it than just because we can and it's fun, and the legal reasons, is by 3D printing things which are not currently commercially available. So getting into much more advanced weapon systems, which can be made at home, which there are no manufacturers which would be willing to make it for liability reasons, legal reasons, or other stuff. I think that could be a big part of it, is kind of growing in, basically getting away from doing conventional small arms and kit guns and getting more into unique or higher performance firearms or weapon systems.
So Tim and I discussed this a little bit before you came on, Kareem, but he touched on a pretty good nerve, something that you very much appreciate. I'm not going to speak for Tim, but I will tell you my frustrations with, again, being in the firearm space for 40 years now. It's pretty stagnant. It's not a hotbed of innovation. It never has been. There's been incremental changes. There's been some good things, but there's nothing like.
Well, it has been. You don't
there's lots
besmirch the good name of John Moses Browning.
There's lots of innovation, but not actual innovation.
Yeah,
depending who you talk.
Yeah, it's all evolution. It's like the biggest change since John Browning in 1909 was Gaston Glock in 1980, right?
Yeah. So there's two ways of looking at this. So one of them, like there's actual like small arms, not much innovation, and I don't have a big problem with that actually. Small arms work really well. There's been a huge amount of innovation in weapon systems in the last 100 years, which have not become available to the civilian market. And that's what I think needs to change. So rather than trying to push small arms forward, just grab something that was invented 100 years ago and find a way of making it cheaply and readily available, kind of like an open source way or do-it-yourself way. I think that is a very good avenue which should be pursued. With there's obviously many legal hurdles and other problems, but that's what I would like to see.
Yes, let's put the disclaimer up here up front for the three-letter agencies and the nannies that what we're going to discuss, we're going to put law to the side for a minute and say, I think what Tim is getting at is like, okay, we should have the ability to 3D print claymores, right? Or any other improvised munitions or improvised explosives. We should be innovating in terms of like, 3D printers would be excellent for more energy-centric weapons, right? Where you either have laser or high velocity projectiles based on electromagnetism or superconductors or something else. Like that would be more of a killer app, if you will, for the 3D printed space. That's if I can produce something that I just can't go and spend $400 at the pawn shop and get another Glock 19, right? Mm-hmm. So Tim, if you've got any insight there as to like what can you get specific on kind of
so like a few examples if you want to get into specific weapons. So explosives is one thing you get into, but let's say I'm trying to pick something that would be pretty easy to talk about, like 20 millimeter anti-tank weapons, for an example. Like Almanzo Ironworks, if you've ever heard of them, I believe they're in the Southwest. They made and may still make a I think bolt action 10-round magazine fed. It's huge. It's like 8 feet long. It's kind of insane, but it's a 20 millimeter shoulder fired, from a bipod weapon. Now you can't really get ammunition. There's some. I was just speaking with John Crump a little bit about this a couple days ago on his show. That is something which, as far as the law is concerned right now, you could manufacture a single shot 20 millimeter rifle. It's a dangerous device. You sell it just like a suppressor, and then the ammunition may currently be interpreted by the ATF as a dangerous device requiring a tax stamp for every round. Obviously not practical, but that's something which is not really in the law. That's one of their little twistings of regulation or of the law. So that's something which in the current legal framework could be manufactured and sold, and I think has an application, an actual anti-materiel rifle, maybe even a new cartridge. I don't like 20 millimeter, maybe a 1-inch round, something like that. That's a very specific example which has had zero interest. There's zero interest in that currently in the greater firearms community or industry, which is probably a better way of looking at it. The industry is not interested in looking at it because of probably the legal issues, and also they think there's no market. And right now there probably isn't a big market. But that's a very specific example of a weapon which has been around for well over 100 years, really. Or I'm going to go with 100 years, since the First World War. That's that type of weapon. And it's not currently available and has never been available to civilians, has no big technology breakthroughs. It just needs to be produced. It's not that hard to make. It's very basic old technology, but no one's making it just because it's a stagnated market that's industry that's very scared of risk and actually very scared in general of the federal government and their interpretations. Most of the firearms industry is very concerned about stepping out of line in any way. So that's what's something that's cool with like the 3D printing gun space is people have kind of pushed the boundaries more and gotten away with it. And kind of gotten people thinking more in that sort of a non-compliance, regulations need to change mindset.
Yeah, I mean, we're conditioned as gun owners to be in this state of like always in a permission state, right? In our brain, that we need to think about permission because it didn't start that way, but we kind of wound up that way where we're in this permission mindset. So I think the 3D printing stuff kind of loosens that grasp and says like, I can start thinking about these things. Like when you're looking at your bamboo sitting on the desk and like, you know what, this would be, have no trouble pooping out 20 millimeter, shells or mechanisms, or at least some sort of caddy or some sort of, shell casing.
And obviously, 3D printing is probably less of a component in this particular example, but there are examples you could come up with that 3D printing might be a big help there. But the point there is less of a technology focus and just a mindset focus. There's a mindset that needs to change, both to not just trying to incorporate new technologies into the civilian weapon space, but also trying to just broaden the idea of what is a weapon. Like thinking if someone says weapon and you're a civilian, you think of my AR-15. When you say weapon, I'm thinking of maybe some sort of an anti-aircraft weapon, an anti-tank weapon, maybe a biological weapon. I mean, there's a lot of weapons with a lot of scope that can have more or less merit. But my whole point is that pool, that word weapon needs to be expanded to mean a lot more when civilians are talking about it.
You love 50 cals. Why?
Because I like anti-materiel rifles, and that's currently the biggest one you can legally buy and get ammo for. It also kind of along that line, you can actually buy tons of really cheap armor-piercing 50 cal ammunition, and you can't say that for any other round because companies are FUDs and are scared of the ATF and laws which don't actually apply to rifle ammunition. So there's that too. I like armor-piercing ammo.
Yeah, this point about like you actually, I was listening to the PSR podcast you were on maybe 2 years ago. You were talking about the Orca. And you made this really great point about how like gun design is dictated by manufacturing technology. We think about like, okay, well, we'll like 3D print AR-15s or whatever. And that actually really misses an opportunity to say like, well, let's, design a gun like the Orca where like, let's design something that plays to the strengths of the manufacturing technology that's being used. So like, what do you think, in a world where everything is additive manufacturing, or at least more things are additive manufacturing, on this thread of like, weapons that's a broad category. What are weapons in that world?
So the fact of the matter comes down to making metal hardware parts is not really the limiting factor with a lot of weapon systems. It's chemistry, it's electronics, it's software. So just moving everything to 3D printing, I don't think you're going to see that huge of an impact on what you can and can't do. What you will see is an impact on accessibility, and that's what we're seeing right now with 3D printed guns. Just because it's much cheaper and easier to get into, I can make an Orca on a subtractive machine from 20, 30 years ago. It just would be very, very expensive. To make the exact same thing in metal or plastic can be done. It's just with 3D printing, it's far more accessible. So that's with 3D printing. I see it as more of a accessibility breakthrough than necessarily a manufacturing breakthrough.
Are you seeing that in, like, what do people tell you when they buy your stuff? Who are they? Are they people getting into this for the first time? Are they saying, like, what are those accessibility stories you hear from people, if you do hear from them?
So this kind of goes back to the why question we talked about earlier. Most people who are getting into it, I don't actually communicate with at all. They just do it very, very private. They don't post anything online because there's hundreds of thousands of people, or I mean, maybe more, but at least hundreds of thousands of people 3D printing weapons in the United States and firearms specifically. And the vast majority of them never talk about it. They're not on social media. They're just kind of just doing it like people always have when they're making guns. As far as the people I've communicated with, most of them do it as a hobby, like model airplanes, except they're building guns. Part of it is the political side of it. The Second Amendment, they think that they're supporting that. And they're kind of helping push that forward and setting sort of a legal precedent about how good it is to just manufacture your own guns. And part of it is just that it's a fun hobby to build your own firearms and shoot them. So right now, those are kind of the main. So the motivations are pretty soft, if that makes sense. It's not like people need this gun. I think that might be the case in some places that have more regulation, not necessarily with my customers, but just people 3D printing guns in general. A very small amount of them in certain areas where it's hard to get other guns are probably doing it because they actually need a gun. But most of them in the United States are doing it for the two reasons I just mentioned.
Well, I guess that goes to, like, one thing we have talked about a bunch with people recently is this, like, 3D printing, and on the thread of, what is a weapon? Why would people want one? Going beyond guns to, like, the drone world and AI and comms, and it feels like there's something swirling there and taking shape, and nobody really knows what yet. But
I mean, I think it's the continuation of the massive explosion in, like, tactical gear and AR-15s and people trying to get into that kind of thing. I think it's just a continuation of the same theme where people are trying to be more militarily prepared, militarily effective. So I think it's just an extenuation of that. People are interested in being able to actually compete with modern militaries and actually bring significant force to the table. I think it's really what it comes down to. Like me, when I'm thinking about what weapons I want, actually a good example of this is the I think this was a Joe Biden comment. I'm not sure if it was before he was in office, but the comment where he said, why do you need an AR-15? It won't do any good against F-15s, I think was the comment. The AR-15 is worthless against modern military aircraft. And so kind of my initial thought when I heard that is, okay, I actually agree with that. And that's why we need to be working on effective anti-aircraft weapons, or, ways of finding and disabling aircraft before they take off, or disabling pilots. I mean, you can keep going down and get very controversial, but that is a good example of the thought process I think a lot of people have, and why this kind of just, getting into more advanced weapons is becoming more popular in the U.S. is people actually want to be an effective, I'm trying to think of a good, like a militia, a good historic word. They want to be an effective fighting force, not just using obsolete small arms. They want to have a well-rounded repository of weapons.
Is this what kind of drove you down into the drone space? Are you going to continue doing that, or?
So the drone stuff is something which I'm not very knowledgeable on, because the electronics and the electronic side of it, the software side of it, I am not good at. Don't know anything about it really. A little bit, but not very much. That is where all the work needs to happen, and I just do hardware stuff. So I'm mostly doing it Like I'm working on some larger quads. Like I have this guy. It's a project I did a little while ago with super obsolete electronics. I'm keeping it around as like a museum piece now, but it was fun. I did that just out of a personal interest project because I wanted to get a quad that would fly for 1 hour. So I was just trying to design a super light frame. The little miniature quadcopters I'm working on, these little guys here, the little red ones. I started this once again as a personal interest project because I had played with an off-the-shelf one a couple years ago, and it was a lot of fun to just buzz around by the house. And it broke on me eventually, just because of crashing it. The frame breaks, and then the electronics get exposed and damaged. So I wanted something that was super durable. I could just buzz around for a couple hours if I wanted to. And that's how this started. And people have been interested, and it's kind of merged into a project where I don't think it'll have any practical application outside of just having fun. But I want something that's super durable and people can just play with who aren't in the quadcopter, because so it's interesting, the FPV world, the first person view, people who are into that has really changed over the last decade from people who are kind of pushing the limits, doing like long range flying, a lot of like Ardu pilot stuff, so autonomous, and it's moved more into guys flying quadcopters fast around racetracks. So the FPV RC hobby has really shifted into that very specific direction. The Chinese got involved, a ton of Chinese parts. So I'd like to see it move back into that more innovation mindset and more focused on larger, more practical frames. But the reason I brought up the racing guys and kind of that shift in the FPV RC community is because it can be intimidating to get into nowadays. And I wanted something which someone can print out and buzz around, which is not scary, which is legal. That's a whole other thing. That's something happened with drones in the last few years, the whole legal thing. But something that's legal, that's lightweight, that's cheap, that they can have a ton of fun with and not break, and just kind of get their feet wet and start understanding some of the basics. And that's kind of the idea now. That's kind of my goal with this project is just something that people can get into, have fun with, and start growing their interest. It's really just an interest grower.
Yeah. I think you're kind of screwed because if you're talking about the next level of
Chuck is very soft-spoken,
and how your thinking is evolving, if you want to take the next obvious step towards kind of the citizens defense, industry, it's going to be drone based, right? I mean, as you see in Ukraine and you see in startups like Anduril and others, like competence with drones for both offense and defense is clearly the centerpiece of next generation warfare, next generation defense and offense. So, I don't see how you're going to avoid the intersection of what you're doing with 3D printed guns and innovation there and drones. So, I think that's a very natural path for you forward in terms of drone interceptors for defending and
so the whole
end.
drone thing I think is a little bit of a fad, and that's going to be very controversial. I think yes, they will be an important weapons platform, but what we're looking at, and the whole word drone is a funny word. I don't like the word myself. I use it sparingly, so people understand them.
It's a UAV like we're supposed to.
This is a
UAS.
quadcopter. This is a quadcopter.
Okay.
It's not an automated system. It's not a drone. Okay. It's
right.
You have to fly it. There's no GPS. Yes, you can make it a drone. I'm going to work on that. It's another fun project. It was making one that flies on GPS, and you can do some interesting stuff actually with off the shelf, really basic stuff for reconnaissance. But what we're looking at here is automated warfare. So something which I want to see a lot more of is automated defense turrets. Now, this is legal problems trying to actually build one with a firearm. But there's a guy, I cannot think of his channel name. He's on YouTube. He's been working on some interesting turrets with airsoft guns. And I believe
Really?
he's used actual firearms in ways which make it legal. But automated defense turrets, something that just sits there and shoots at people when it sees them. That's something I would love to see more work on. And I think that could be as useful or more useful than a drone in many scenarios because it's
a bit static. If you took that same capability and put it in a mobile, in a more three-dimensionally mobile platform
for
like
offensive
a UAV,
use. Well, there's
or defensive. Yeah. I mean, like if I have two of those, going around my perimeter, my property, I'm pretty secure.
Yeah. The difference being that a defense turret is actually really easy to make, and you can deploy a bunch of them. with huge amounts of
It's a simple
firepower.
solution.
Yeah, there's no reason, which we haven't had one a decade ago. Well, I mean, kind of. Things have gotten better. Vision systems have gotten a lot better in the last decade. But that's something I would love to see, which is not a drone. Missiles, so guided munitions. Technically, those are actually drones, but it's not what people think of as a drone. That's something I would like to see a lot more of. So when people say drones are the future, they're picturing a little quadcopter. When I think what they need to be saying is more automated systems are the future. Computer controlled systems that have really been around for a long time. There's been some pretty good guided systems. There's a lot of technologies. I mean, even something as old as like a beam riding could be deployed very effectively in the civilian world. To give you an example, I've just been thinking about this. Kinetic energy bombs are an interesting concept. If you drop a streamlined, dense object from 20,000 feet, it'll be supersonic by the time it gets to the ground, and you can do a lot of damage with very basic, without explosives. Explosives,
Yeah, you should.
can be challenging.
You should talk to Palmer Luckey. He's one of his favorite projects is putting tungsten rods in space and then just being able to deploy those, just lob them into Earth.
The Rods from God project.
So the rods from God. Yeah. Everybody's got the kinetic idea.
Yeah. But it's an effective thing. It's used by the military for like bunker buster bombs, usually rocket assist, not always. But that's just one example, limited example, outside of just that standard picture of a quadcopter blowing people up. So that's why I think our focus should not be just on drones of the future. It's automated systems to kind of close that off.
Yeah, but just to Kareem's point, in this swirling of kind of AI, 3D printing, munitions, it's clearly here. I think you will clearly see opportunities if that does interest you. You're in a good position to kind of help merge those things together. Like you said, it's on the hardware side you have more proficient, but on the software side, getting those AI systems, those autonomous flight controls, what we call SLAM. I think it's called SLAM. The
simultaneous localization and mapping. I think
exactly. So the non GPS based navigation, autonomous navigation.
Which I'm very,
that stuff is coming along.
Yeah,
it's coming along super fast. So, I mean, I think this is the path that we were talking about, kind of taking it beyond just Glock frames and AR frames.
And this is where I brought up earlier. I brought up a super old, kind of obsolete weapon, which was that 20 millimeter, because the point I was trying to make there was that we just need to open up in general to new weapon systems, and that absolutely applies to new developments like drones and AI guided systems. It's the same concept. We just need to be looking at, okay, these small arms are not good enough. They're no longer effective by themselves. We need to be looking at more effective weapon systems.
I think a lot of this stuff is like, it's like martial arts before the UFC or something, where there was a lot of theory and a lot of, here's how this will work when it's really put to the test. And, in the past few years, we've seen a lot of this stuff get put to the test for the first time. And now there's just this like avalanche of innovation plugging all of the now obvious holes, and like the cat and mouse game as this stuff develops is just getting really, really fast. One thing I'm really struck by in your messaging and like really like about it is there's a very martial focus to what you do. And we talk a lot about like the civilian defense industry. And you sell to civilians, but there is like, it's almost like the private military aspect of that world. Like, how do you see that? Do you see the like martial applications of what you do as the same as or benefiting from civilian applications?
So
or do
clarify
you see them like
the difference between a martial application and a civilian application.
So I think think about like perimeter defense drones or defense turrets or something. A like classic civilian application would be, burglars, the Amazon guy is here, etc.
I got you. Okay, so basically, my perspective is pretty much exclusively anti-government. if that makes sense. So,
Yeah.
and not really even for the U.S., but it's more of an issue in foreign countries. I mean, like the example we would see with 3D printed guns is, what's happened in Myanmar, which I'm sure you guys have covered in depth in the past. But
Not
that's an
not
area
as
where
much as we should have, probably. No,
that's
but
that's
like the
I'm actually not.
FGC9 is
That's
just,
something
yeah.
that I think Jared, Print Shoot Repeat would be someone he knows a lot more about that. He was actually over there at one point before the conflict, so he's pretty
Well,
familiar with the area. But that was just an example where a civilian population needed weapons to fight against their military who took over the government. I believe is what happened. And they were printing FGC9s. There's quite a few actually interesting kind of improvised weapons over there that use 3D printed components and different designs, which have come from the US and from Europe. Like the FGC9 is from Europe. That is an example of current 3D printed guns that found a use, actual practical use. So I think all these kind of weapon systems that we're discussing need to be developed so that when they're required by a civilian population, they're available to them. So obviously, I mean, I don't know if you guys can think of them, but I can think of some very good applications I could use right now with some defense turrets around the house, just as kind of an extra protection, extra security for certain attackers. So I don't see the difference between the martial and the civilian. I think that all civilians should be prepared for the martial situation. Like the defensive handgun discussions, I have absolutely no interest in. Like that's been covered. That was done hundreds of years. Like we finished that conversation hundreds of years ago, if you ask me. So the everything I'm discussing is martial, and I believe that martial is civilian. To summarize it.
so how do you? That makes a ton of sense. How do you think about like community and units in this world or in this kind of
So
vision? Right, like there is no military unit that's one guy outside of movies. So
yes. So
how does
I
this
have
work?
to strongly disagree with that. I think that in many of these resistance cases, you're not looking at an open warfare. You're looking at a relatively
All right, we had some technical difficulties. A camera went out, potential ATF raid. It went dark for a few minutes, but Tim is back. Don't worry. And we were talking about. I said, where does community fit into this world? And yeah, Tim, you said it doesn't need to.
Yeah. So the whole community thing is a really popular point that big influencers like to push. I talk about it, and I agree. I think community is good. Like disaster relief, for an example, a lot of actual just completely civil applications, community is awesome, and you should totally work on it. But as far as the more martial aspects, and that's a word I don't really use. I think I'm going to run with that word now. I kind of like it. You're going to be seeing more of a occupied France underground sort of a thing, but with a lot more modern technology. So coordination between people, absolutely, but not in the kind of open, classic, oh, we have a military unit of 4 guys, we're going to go do a mission kind of a thing. You're instead going to be, planting charges on infrastructure, or you and one other guy are going to deploy, a dozen attack drones to take out some target. That kind of, it's going to be much more clandestine. If you want to be an effective practical force, I think it's going to be much more clandestine than we've seen in the past.
That's interesting.
Depending, obviously, on the conflict. Like, if there's an open
Well,
conflict between 2 big militaries that already exist, and people are getting involved in that, like the Ukraine situation, that kind of thing, that is an entirely different scenario than trying to make some small adjustments.
I guess the point is we should, we can go do our homework here because there's no shortage of conflict in human history. Like we should be able to backtest this, your assertion. And you gave the World War II example of French resistance, and there's probably enough documentation there to understand what the level of organization was. Was it to the level guys like Isaac Bakken proclaim is going to be like, you will be with your neighbors, you will be an effective kind of training force, you will help each other out at a kind of a unit level? Or will it be more renegade kind of guerrilla style that we saw like in South America, where it's more kind of individual sabotage, individual infrastructure attacks? Were those effective? Did they get the change that those people wanted, or were they just a nuisance, and were they flies that were swatted down over time? So it's a big question. It's probably something we could
It's something.
back
So
test.
that's actually a really good point. It's something that would probably change throughout a conflict, depending on the stage and the people, and the players involved. Kind of because more than people or the organizations involved. But it also depends a lot on the technology used. The reason I kind of brought this up, kind of controversial point, is that with the newer technologies, you're kind of leveraging manpower, if that makes sense. So you can do a lot more damage with a lot more upfront work. So more people working up front, developing some sort of a system, and you don't have a bunch of grunts on the ground who have to like go in with rifles and do something. So basically, I'm just saying tactics and basically, yeah, tactics and strategies are going to change based on new technology available to the modern guerrilla or whatever it is in this
That's
particular
interesting.
instance.
So yeah, you're saying there might be an additional form of that kind of warfare that we haven't even seen yet.
Exactly. And I
Yeah,
don't know what that I don't I mean I haven't seen it. I'm just kind of speculating, but that's what I'm trying to say. It's going to be something new.
interesting.
Maybe shifting gears to talk about Hoffman Tactical a bit. Um, I don't know if this is the most common way people have heard of you. I first heard of you with the super safety, and I thought like, okay, this is cool, and this guy is not long for this world. Like he,
Yeah,
but you did not call us collect from a jail cell. This is a normal podcast.
so sadly a lot the super safety is kind of what most people know me for. I mean, it was a fun project, but I don't like. I get a lot of irritating emails, people asking me super safety questions, so I'm a little sour about it, maybe, but might be a little biased. So, did you want to take that question in like the legal side of things, or where did you want to go with that?
I'm curious, just like how much is that on your radar? How much is it like a side project, a thing you think about, um, or not?
Okay. So that was, I mean, as far as the project, that is closed. Now, I mean, that might change, but I did that project relatively quickly. It took about a year to go from, I mean, there's a little longer than that if you want to go all the way to the beginning, but it took about a year to like get it all tested and get it actually released as a complete package. And then I moved on to doing all my new lowers basically. And the Orca kind of overlapped with it. But the Super Safety project was something that sort of just happened. It came up because I had an idea one day to do the basically clone the rare breed style, the 223 patent, the rare breed style force reset trigger, which I did. Got a cease and desist, had some legal issues with their patent, and I started just thinking about other ways of doing it. More of just because I wanted to keep doing it, sort of like as a obstacle to overcome. And then once I did, I think really what motivated that project, and I can sort of say this now more than in the past. I don't think I really said this before publicly, but what really motivated that project is I want people to be more comfortable working near the edge. So instead of being scared and trying to self-regulate, being more comfortable working actually inside of our current legal framework and realizing that the federal government does not have unlimited power to just crush you if it's a lot of people kind of working together and saying no, this is actually legal and we can do it, which is basically what's happened. So that was kind of why I pushed that project forward to perfection and did such a detailed release on it.
That's interesting. I don't want to put down your baby here, but I mean it's interesting. I've only had limited experience with these kind of like force reset triggers or whatever these devices, but I definitely clump them into the novelty bin of like, okay, this is interesting. It's cute. Does it give me any major advantage?
It does.
Not clear. You think it
So,
does?
well, here's what it does. And I'll just say this: it completely simulates fully automatic fire. And there are people who say that precision semi-auto shots are the way to go. They're wrong. Full auto is absolutely incredibly effective in many scenarios with the proper weapon. I mean, if you're taking a lightweight M4 or a lightweight M14, in the worst case scenario, and trying to use it as a machine gun, that's a problem. However, if you look at actual military engagements, the weapons that actual militaries use, machine guns is where the majority of the firepower is. It's not in
Yeah, but
precision shots.
in a limited way, right? Those are smaller unit weapons now, like smaller number of people carrying them. It's like everything now is if they produce a full auto weapon, it's usually a burst, right? A 3-round burst or something.
The sound
Losing
dropped
you?
out there. I don't think it's on my end.
Can you hear me okay,
Can
Kareem?
you? I can hear you.
Just a second.
Yeah.
I don't know if you guys can hear me. Just give me a thumbs up.
Can you hear me?
Okay, and you can hear each other.
Yes.
That is weird. Yeah, we have no audio over here. We're just getting into one of my favorite controversial topics. Let me just go check on the computer and see what it says. This is hilarious.
Again, we're pretty sure 3-letter agencies are affecting our work here. We got Tim to reconnect and see if he stays stable with this connection, but you never know what's going on. We were about to debate, the force reset trigger, the Hoffman trigger. I'm calling it a novelty. I don't think things like these little tricky gizmos that simulate full auto fire have much value at all. Tim, I think, has other views, and we were just getting into that.
I think I'll approach this a little differently than I did when we had that problem. I think it'll be clearer. I'll ask you, do you think fully automatic weapons are a novelty, or do they have application?
I think you hit on this before. They probably have a very limited application, but the evidence I have is that most militaries go to burst now, a 3-round burst, even maybe a 5-round burst or a 3-round burst, where they don't there's no value for the majority of infantrymen to have the ability to go full auto. It hasn't proven to be worth it, right? Otherwise, they would still use it.
So, what are your thoughts on the M249, the SAW?
Yeah, I don't know. It's always that one gun, right? There's the 249 is the SAW, the squad automatic weapon. It has a specific role in a squad. It's like the one thing. It's in a limited number of the X number of people in the unit. There's just one per X.
Yes.
So if you want to make the argument that if you're a group of X people, that you should have one full auto, and that's a 308 or larger.
But the 249 is 5.56.
Is it 5.56?
Yeah. The 240 is 308, and that's
240 is 308.
I think it has an application. What are your thoughts on the M2, the 50 caliber belt-fed machine gun? Of course, famously upscaled from Browning's 1919.
So we're talking about a pyramid, right? So yes, at the top of the pyramid, you have the bigger stuff. I think for the regular schmucks like you and me, and for most people, where we're at the bottom of the pyramid, we're probably going to do well with semi-auto. And I'm very biased. I'll tell you why. Because I'm a USPSA shooter, a 3-gun shooter. I have a really nice JP CTR 15, right? With a super nice trigger. Or I have a Hyperfire trigger in one of my 9s or in one of my 223s. I can crack that thing off with a Mikulik style compensator with just no dot movement whatsoever. I can stay on target and do tick, 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 tick all day long, right? I'm talking like a 2-pound, 3-pound trigger pull. So I know it's not full auto doing that, but I can put a dot on a spot and let loose a 30-round mag without, with no effort.
And I would argue with a proper fully automatic system, you could do the same thing twice as fast, which has advantages in some scenarios. You have a higher hit chance for that magazine on a particular target you're shooting at, let's say behind a vehicle. My point with bringing up the M2 and the SAW was that while it might be a niche application, in your opinion or in your application, which is totally valid, I see where you're coming from. I think it's still an application, and the active reset, force reset stuff is basically filling that role. It's not like it's a crank trigger. That is gimmicky because it does something.
Or a bump stock.
Or a bump stock, exactly. Right. It's filling a legitimate role that I believe is there. And
so
it's doing it just as effectively, just legally.
Right, but so it would have been more effective if you made one for 249, because for AR platform I have a 30-round mag, and that's not until I have a belt-fed M4, then that's more interesting.
So an example of this is currently the only market option for belt-fed AR stuff is going to be the Fight Light uppers.
Fight Light,
they're expensive. There's currently I've actually worked on belt-fed projects in the past. There's a lot of technical issues getting belt-feds to work with standard AR bolts, and I had some very DIY goals, and it's possible, but has practical issues. So I kind of have set that aside for now. But there's another project. It's the Lima 6. The gentleman's on Twitter. He's made some excellent progress. He's basically working on a belt-fed AR-15 upper. It's going to be compatible with standard AR barrels, so it can work with the heat mitigation systems from Red Right Hand LLC. He works on heat shields, and it's got some aluminum heat sinks. You get some pretty good performance for auto rifles. So this particular example, combined with the super safety, gives you a saw-like system in a lighter weight package. With some limitations. It's not open bolt, because there's still some legal issues there. Though I think there are ways around it. They're more technical. So that gives you a belt-fed squad automatic weapon, just as an example. And I think that absolutely has practical application, and active reset triggers are a very reliable solution to getting that kind of performance. So just as an example.
I'll agree. If the need is to have a SAW, then your device makes sense. I'll still kind of maintain that it's more of a Bubba device for the rank and file to slap it in their Palmetto AR.
And of course,
nothing against that. That's great.
I think the whole no full auto thing is more of a civilian competition shooter focus because of this, because of the type of shooting you do, rather than that martial focus. And that's, I think, is just kind of the perspective there. I don't have too much experience either way. I just know what I have seen, I think that there is an application for fast weapons. And I think that active reset stuff has done an awesome job providing that to civilians in a way which the federal government has had a huge problem stopping.
Yeah, I want to make it clear. I agree with you, and I would love to have just regular full auto myself, just for the fun factor and just because I want to. So I don't want to give the impression that I'm against this thing. I just, think it's a good thing to have, but tactically, I guess we would have to do a little more research about where it's effective.
Yeah, and are you trying to defend your home against an intruder? Not something I would want to be using, depending on the intruder. I would say it's very application specific and much more focused on martial things rather than traditional civilian applications. But what it is it's expanding the scope of what a civilian weapon is, and that's really the big thing. Right. It's expanding what a civilian weapon from a standard, just single, standard semi-automatic AR. You now have an active reset rather than a passive reset, so you can stimulate that fully automatic fire, and it is opening up that scope we talked about earlier of what a civilian weapon is, and I think that's the most important aspect.
All right, one more audio gremlin. But I was saying, so where the discussion started is the super safety came, you said earlier, came from this idea of encouraging people to, how did you say it? Work close to the limit, push the boundaries?
Really, to not self-regulate is the big thing there.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, pushing the boundaries has some different connotations. It's really just not self-regulating and working within the full scope of the current regulatory framework.
Okay, so why do you think it is that you're the one doing that? Like on paper, you would imagine that the people who are like really opening people's eyes and encouraging them not to self-regulate is not like a guy who decides to do it and is just like super driven and smart. You would expect like some really well-resourced company is going to do this, or
so there's why
is this coming from you?
There's a very specific reason for that, and that is the larger the organization, the more risk adverse they are. Pretty much, they have each individual member sees that. Well, actually, so it's interesting. The firearm space is not totally true, but it's really that the larger organizations are more risk adverse. I guess I shouldn't try to make it more complicated than it is. That's really what it is. Gun companies in general are extremely adverse to risk. They're afraid that most of them are. It's hard to make generalities. So I'll just say that they're adverse to risk, and there's different reasons why. Small single individuals like me are more tolerant to risk, or we just understand that the risks were actually minimal.
I mean, it makes sense. I mean, they have more to lose. They have bigger concerns. I will say there's one exception. I'll call them out publicly because they've done so much. Franklin Armory has done some pretty bold things for being a pretty big company in terms of compliance, working within the compliance framework that's been thrust upon us to get the maximum amount of utility out of rifles. It's been pretty good.
So Franklin does binary stuff, don't they?
They do, but they also do California stuff.
Gotcha.
It's kind of so just let me you made this point before, and I want to basically back up what you said. And I've made this point in other places, but I've lived in New York growing up, and then after I left college, I moved to California just as the beginning of the whole worst gun laws in history started, which was 1989. And I've been to California. I'm out of California now for about 2 years, but my whole time in California, I was able to get every piece of hardware I wanted, rifle, pistol, or otherwise, against a slew, like an endless supply of the most brain dead anti-gun, just absolutely cosmetic BS laws you've ever seen. Yet still, every time they threw another one in front of us, we got around it with technology, right? And Franklin Armory did a lot of that. A lot of other people stepped up and did it. So if you want examples of it's not just, Tim kind of doing things, look in occupied lands like Massachusetts, New Jersey, New York, California, Hawaii, Michigan, maybe not Michigan, but Illinois. And you will see people innovating around really bad law and getting what they want. We have real life examples of lots of kind of Tims out there doing things to this information is going to get there no matter what.
That's a fantastic point. And actually, there's a lot to be learned from the smaller conflicts inside states, non-compliance and other different kind of civil techniques. So that's an excellent point, and something which I probably should learn more from, because I'm in Tennessee here and we don't have that much to worry about, though we do have our problems. So that is an excellent point. So we're getting near the end here. I don't know how you guys want to close out. I did want to kind of not back up anything, but I did want to kind of add some additional context to this. And that is, throughout this conversation, we've been discussing, military martial stuff, some in general, actually, more dark militaristic stuff. So I did want to say that kind of my main interest is actually very much on the non-military civil side. I would love to see no conflicts. I would love to see just peace and prosperity, because I like to work on airships is one thing I like to work on. So I have a lot of I do hot air ballooning. So I have interests outside of weapons, and I think that's probably true for a lot of people. So and this is more from like the political spectrum. People like to point fingers at extremists. I think it's more that we're just concerned with the direction technology in the last 100 years in many ways has centralized power. And the fact that it's going in the opposite direction, or has the potential to go in the opposite direction, is just something that I'm very interested in, others are very interested in, because of the massive dystopian side effects of huge centralized power. So it's just more of like, this is more of an insurance thing. We don't want to see massive centralized governments, like in Europe, for an example, happen in the U.S. That's really what it comes down to in the end, rather than just looking for trouble.
That's awesome. I know you do have to go in a few minutes. I did want to ask you about hot air balloons. Give us like 60 seconds on why hot air balloons are cool.
Because they're one step closer to airships. And airships are awesome because they're just an efficient, wonderful way to fly, lots of space. They're very expensive, not cost effective, but in a proper modern civilization, we really shouldn't have to worry about that, because technology has brought us so many resources and given us so much free time, theoretically. It should.
Okay. Love it.
There
Tim,
it goes.
Thanks so much.
Again.
I can bring that back. This is why I use the other camera. I gotta figure out the external power supply. This one goes to sleep every 30 minutes. It's irritating. Okay. It's not set up.
Well, that's fine.
That's okay.
Tim,
that's great. Go in a couple of minutes, and there's a hot air balloon flight leaving in 6 minutes. So
actually, that's more true than you might know. But anyway, we'll just continue with how you want to outro this.
That's it. I think we can end it there.
Cool.